It is indeed my privilege to release a book on Chief Justice Venkatachalaya, one of our most revered and distinguished judges. Justice Venkatachalaya needs no introduction. It's our privilege in holding this function to celebrate his life and work. A thorough gentleman, an erudite scholar, a truly outstanding judge. He symbolizes the ideal face of the judiciary. It is given to very few to attain such a position and yet remain detached and untouched by it. Fame is a vapor, popularity an accident, riches take wings. Only one thing endures, and that is character. By his life and example, Justice Venkatachalaya has demonstrated this great truth. His presence in the Apex Court and later as CEI was foreboding to those whose intentions were to do wrong. Much like that of a strict father in the family, his ability to reach the nub of any dispute was remarkable. It would be difficult to label him either as a traditionalist or a reformist. He could and did adopt either view depending on the need of the hour. It can be truly said of him that he surpassed the high position which a judge holds in society and attain a position like few have, or maybe none has. I find it difficult to talk of his greatness as a man and as a judge merely with reference to some achievements and some judgments, because he brought to bear in his life his own vision, his extraordinary sense of right and wrong, and a fearlessness which made him unstoppable. Few could make out from that urbane, self-effacing demeanor on the bench that there was a steely resolve to do justice at any cost. If his career can be called phenomenal, his activities after he demitted office are even more so. His contribution to public life as a chairman of the Human Rights Commission has been remarkable, and even more as the chairman of the National Commission to review the workings of the Constitution. He has probably not let a single day go by in his life without doing some creative thinking. His various speeches and writings over the years have helped to enliven our thought process and enhance the quality of life. His learning does not consist merely in being well-read, but in the power of discrimination, the power to see the truth in the false and the false in the true. Never does his vision dim, his grasp weaken, or memory fail. At 92, he has the inquisitiveness of a child and the spirit of eternal youth that may be the envy of younger men. His simplicity reminds me of the man in Dostoevsky's Brother Karamazov who used to ask the birds to forgive him. By personal contact with Justice Venkatachalaya, you not only learn something, but become something. Justice Venkatachalaya's life and work is an inspiration and a lesson for all of us. His judgments are marvelous pieces of elucidation of legal problems and a source of lambent light on ticklish legal corners, manifesting his visionary genius and capacity to draw analogies from precedents for courts across the spectrum. The book is an admirable, timely reminder of the great values that his life and work represent and would be an abiding influence on our lives, and thinking, illuminating the landscape with his effulgence. I'm sure this book would be of immense help for not just legal practitioners in India, but all over the world.
Speaking at the launch of the book, we honor the amalgam of those values which Chief Justice Venkatachalaya combines. Those values which his work has put forth are too nuanced and numerous to be reduced to a list. Realizing the limitations of such a task, I will attempt to enlist a few. An unwavering commitment to judicial independence, profound scholarship, a nuanced interpretation of law, the ability as an administrator to take principled positions, a moral authority to confront injustice in all its forms, and above all, compassion and dignity without which the judge's craft can be in vain. The book celebrates the life and work of one of India's finest jurists, a man with unparalleled skill, humility, and a sense of impartiality. Justice Venkatachalaya has had an illustrious tenure and has contributed to the legal profession not just before taking up a position on the bench, but after his retirement as well. Apart from his legal prowess, he is undoubtedly one of India's finest Chief Justices, a forward thinker and a firm believer in the institution of the judiciary and its future. As one of the country's finest legal minds, Chief Justice Venkatachalaya's contribution to the law is not restricted to a few subject areas, but range from issues of constitutional law, statutory interpretation, taxation, administrative law, to human rights. While reading his work as a lawyer and a judge, I'm reminded of a saying of Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, and when he said, "I long have said that there is no such thing as a hard case. I'm frightened weakly, but always when you walk up to the lion and lay hold the hide, it comes off, and the same old donkey of a question of law lies underneath." Justice Venkatachalaya's judgments would have one believe that there are no hard cases, only questions of law answered in the simplest of prose, stripped of rhetoric, supported by crisp analysis and a neatly organized discussion of rival contentions. Complexity is not a familiar instrument in the hands of the truly learned. If there were to be hard cases, then Justice Venkatachalaya came close to being Hercules, Ronald Dworkin's well-known model of an ideal judge, an omniscient judge of infinite competence, intelligence, and resourcefulness, the only one truly capable of resolving such cases. It would be impossible for me to cover all the cases which highlight Justice Venkatachalaya's intellect and craftsmanship in the limited time that I have. However, pardon me for referring to a few of my own favorite cases. Joginder Kumar versus UP, Justice Venkatachalaya held that the right to have someone informed upon arrest and to consult privately with a lawyer are inherent in Articles 21 and 22 and issued guidelines to effectuate the right. In Sheila Barse, an application was brought to withdraw a public interest litigation, which was filed to highlight the gross violation of constitutional rights of children in custodial detention and jails, not allowing a public cause to go waste. The Chief Justice replaced the applicant with the Supreme Court Legal Aid Committee. Importantly, he made observations regarding the right of citizens to criticize the systemic inadequacies in the Indian judiciary in public interest. Observations which are as or even more relevant as ever today. Justice Venkatachalaya observed, "It is the privileged right of the Indian citizen to believe what he considers to be true and to speak out his mind, though not perhaps always with the best of tastes, and speak perhaps with greater courage than care for exactitude. The judiciary is not exempt from such criticism. Judicial institutions are and should be made of stronger stuff, intended to endure and thrive even in such hardy a climate. We would do well to remember his words and not transgress the freedom and the privilege Indian citizens enjoy. After all, the democratic credentials of the Supreme Court uphold its authority and dignity in the eyes of the people. His journey as a protector of civil liberties continued when he donned the role of the chairperson of the Human Rights Commission, the National Human Rights Commission. At the recommendation made by the Commission during his tenure to include truth as a defense to contempt was accepted. Much can be said about the work of Justice Venkatachalaya as a legal scholar, but what most people do not realize is his quality of being an able administrator as well. Termed as the rescuer of the Indian judiciary, Justice Venkatachalaya demonstrated this in appointing judges, adhering to the principles of impartiality which he preached and practiced. He transferred about 50 judges to different high courts to ensure that their relatives do not appear before them. A staunch proponent of the doctrine of separation of powers, Justice Venkatachalaya, both during and after his term as CJI, sought to protect the independence of the judiciary from the executive. He is also credited with bringing down the pendency of the cases in the Supreme Court to a mere 19,000 cases at that time. Measures taken by him included extension of working hours, streamlining of cases, and introduction of technology in the Supreme Court to ensure that the status report of cases is accessible to everyone. What strikes me the most about Justice Venkatachalaya is his vision of the Indian society and his belief in the judicial system to reform itself. In fact, he said that the judicial system in the country is not perfect, but it is the system which we have to work with. And if one does not have faith in it, then we have no business meddling with it. I'm reminded, as I conclude, of a historic public letter that American civil rights advocate and federal court Judge Higginbotham wrote to Justice Clarence Thomas when he said, over the next 4 decades, you will cast many historic votes on issues that will profoundly affect the quality of life for our citizens for generations to come. You can become an exemplar of fairness and the rational interpretation of the Constitution, or you can become an archetype of inequality and the retrogressive evaluation of human rights. The choice as to whether you will build a decisional record of true greatness or of mere mediocrity is yours. There is no doubt about where Justice Venkatachalaya's legacy falls. What makes Justice Venkatachalaya one of the greatest judges this country has ever seen is not simply his extraordinary intellect, but his commitment to the Constitution, to fairness in personal conduct, and his transformative impact on the judiciary that makes him truly a class apart.
More than 30 years ago, I had attended an inaugural address delivered in New York to members of the International Bar Association. The speaker was the then Chief Justice of the New York Court of Appeals, America's most prestigious federal court. The judge began his address by telling his audience that when he was first appointed to his exalted office, he took his wife to see the court. And in the courtroom of the Chief Justice, he said to her in very soft, reverent tones, "This, my dear, is where Chief Justice Benjamin Cardozo sat, and it is in this court that I will now sit," believing that his wife would be suitably impressed. But all that his wife said to him, not too softly nor reverently, was, "Yes, my dear, and after 50 more years and 5 more Chief Justices, it will still be Justice Benjamin Cardozo's court." Taking my cue from this true story, I must confess to you all that since practicing exclusively and almost continuously in the country's apex court for nearly 50 long years before a vast succession of Chief Justice. I look upon Court number 1 in the Supreme Court as the Venkatachalaya Court. This is not just because he was a robust, erudite and compassionate Chief Justice, but because he had one most endearing quality which no judge of the Supreme Court of India before or after he sat has exhibited. And as you all know, Justice Venkatachalaya always was and continues to be a voracious reader, not just of law books, but of all writings that stimulate the mind. He has always been a purveyor of fine words expressing great thoughts. But, and this is that endearing quality, he possesses that rare gift of sharing his phenomenal knowledge and learning with fellow beings. To have known Venkatachalaya is to have known and appreciated the importance of true wisdom. He is not just a man and a judge, as the title of the book proclaims. To me, he was and will always remain a man and a judge for all seasons. The legal fraternity of India is proud and grateful that after 25 years into his retirement as Chief Justice, the Samuel Johnson of Indian jurisprudence has found a Boswell.
This occasion is a poignant illustration of how expression of unbounded personal affection and kindness can transform and exalt even an ordinary, prosaic and humble life to look important. Mine has been a just run-of-the-mill career in law. Frankly, what enabled me to surmount my intellectual limitations is the constant friendly appreciation and advice from colleagues and the legal community. Of course, some good reading helped. Whatever I have learned was from my father, who spoke the language of law so beautifully, and through my interaction with scholarly lawyers and judicial colleagues. Abdul Kalam Sahab, President of India, some 25 years ago, at a convocation of a North Indian university, asked that university to prepare and publish my biography. A team from the university descended on Bangalore for the preparation. I persuaded them to give up the idea, assuring them that I would instead request Sri Sudesh Pai to write biographies of our great legal legends. And in that, I shall add that my endeavor was to be worthy of that great legacy. That's how the much appreciated book on legal legends by Sudesh Pai came about. But it seems that the spirit of Abdul Kalam cannot be undone. Deeper insights into the institutions of public law and principles of legal control of government and judicial review make institutions of democracy work. Foundations of judicial review considered by some as anti-democratic is the public confidence, the willingness of the people to obey courts is the greatest asset of a democracy. Constant, meaningless negotiation of the judiciary. And those who do it know that they are merely hacking away at the foundations of their own liberty and safety. You must know that it's much easier to be a hero than a gentleman. In the United Kingdom, legal procedure has defined access to public law remedies. In India, however, public law has redefined procedures for the remedies in public law. The brave new world of technology holds forth great hopes for a tired and worn-out machinery of justice. The orality of the process emphasized in the common law system can be reduced considerably with technology enabling 70% of the procedure to be online, reducing time load, cost, loss of man-hours, and loss of productivity. There is a massive need for training of the judicial legal community and the paralegal and parajudicial staff. Someone exalted, if those committed to this quest fail, they will be forgiven. When lost, they will find another way. The moral imperative of humanism is the endeavor alone, whether successful or not, provided the effort was honorable and the failure memorable. I believe that the assurance of justice is not only the overarching humanism permeating the legal system, but today firmly also is our ability and willingness to absorb new ways and means to assure the results. What we must do is not assure only promise a procedure, but we must assure results. That's the finest level of the judiciary. Ladies and gentlemen, I am greatly beholden to all of you for the kind sentiments you have expressed. I'm not vain enough to think that I can appropriate your kindness to myself, but it leaves me in tears to feel that at 92, all of you, great lawyers, great judges, distinguished personality like Mr. Nariman, you have assembled here to remember the little service that I did. I am most grateful to you. This is going to be the most touching and elevating moment of my life. Thank you very much I am grateful to each one of you for the most kind sentiments you have expressed about me. Thank you so much. I must thank Sudesh. We have spent hours together discussing many matters. This book is the tribute to a 40-year-old dear friendship. I am most grateful to all of you. Thank you so much for this great evening, sir. Thank you. Namaskar.